Richard, I was just wondering, do you feel old?
For women's soccer circles, yes, I do.
Me too.
Yes, I do. I also want to say, since Richard being a little bit of a wise guy back there, but you know, all the people who are here, Richard and Jen, and Meg back there, and Steph and Kieran, and everybody back there, you know, a lot of people do a lot of great work covering this league. So try to get out there, you know, and follow their work. Some of these guys over here are also doing good work. So, you know, there's a lot of good people putting out good content about women's soccer. So it is out there to be consumed. Sometimes you have to find it.
Well, I know you guys always have your ear to the ground, so is there anything on expansion, or there's a lot of rumors and talk, but
nothing imminent that I know of, but I do know there are definitely groups that are interested, and I would definitely tell you that the league will get bigger, not smaller.
because we keep hearing once LAFC gets going that Mia might have something out there, but that's still years away. And then one of the Carolinas already has like an established, I don't know if they're regional, I don't know what the right terminology is.
They're an NASL team,
Yes.
and they've registered some names.
Yeah, they're actually on record saying that they're interested in joining NWSL, and we'll see what happens with LAFC. But I think LA is a pretty decent possibility for sooner rather than later.
Yes, we need a California team.
You're from-
Yeah, but not saying not good enough at the moment for NWSL.
The most important thing, I think, with any expansion chatter is that there is expansion chatter. We really didn't have that in WSA or WPS, and anybody following WPS knew that once you got to year 2, most of the chatter was let's survive and who's going to take the place of the teams that are folding. So, you know, regardless, the fact that there's expansion chatter and more than just one team is huge.
Yeah, that's a good thing to piggyback off of that. I think every year that I went to a final, there was always questions like, oh, is the league going to survive? Is this team going to survive? Is this team moving? What's going on? Is the league going to be back? Last year in Portland was the first time that I felt like people wanted to talk about the game. Like I actually sat down and spoke to random people about the tactics of the game. And nobody mentioned, is the league folding? Are any teams folding? Obviously, there are teams that are doing a little bit better than others, but that's a good point. That the general narrative of women's soccer now is, like I said, NWSL started here, but is moving in this direction. I think that pretty much covers every aspect of it.
I mean, it's one of those tropes that we keep hearing, same as anytime they're covering the Women's World Cup, you hear that, well, the rest of the world is catching up. It's like, well, I heard that 12 years ago, 16 years ago, and, you know, it's the same thing that, you know, will women's soccer survive? And that's why, like, you know, something that Jeff said to the media earlier this week in response to Abby Wambach being on the Bill Simmons show and how to save women's soccer. It's like, it doesn't really need saving. It needs growing. It needs exposure. It needs marketing. It needs support. It needs positive comments. You know, and when I say that, I mean, hey, if you see an opportunity to share something positive about the game, share it. If you have free tickets, give it to someone who has never been to the game before. If you see someone being an ass on Twitter about soccer, ignore them. All right? Don't pump up the volume. You know what I'm saying? But if you have gear that has your team or NWSL or US Soccer, wear it. Let people know what it is. Give it as a gift. Make your entire family have, you know, Washington Freedom, Western New York Flash, Portland Lawrence gear.
Spirit.
Sorry. Washington Freedom.
That's two.
Hey, you can still get Washington Freedom gear off of eBay.
And if I can piggyback on that, positive doesn't mean fluffy.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, don't be fluffy.
You know, if your favorite player has a bad game, that's, you know, let's talk about that. You know, that's where we're trying to get, right? Is anybody here from Boston? You know, the Red Sox are struggling. I'm sure there's a lot of angst back there. I'm sure that's fine to have in women's soccer too.
Yeah.
We don't all have to be friendly and talking everybody up. You know, if a player has a bad game, that's fine for conversation.
Well, and you can see even the players themselves, when they are on the field, they are cutthroat. You know, they will break each other's legs. The second they're off the field, they're all best friends. You know, so it's competition, it's sport. And for me, one of the biggest changes that I saw between 1999 and 2003 in terms of Women's World Cup was when the U.S. went out in the semifinal, there was this huge analytical discussion of, well, should the subs have been different, or should the formation be different, or do we need a new that was so exciting to me that it was like people were actually engaged on a sporting level. And then we saw that amplified tenfold the next Women's World Cup when you had the dramatic benching of Hope Solo for the semifinal. The discussion around that, separate from should she have talked about a coach or not, was, hey, if you're a coach, do you change the coach before the semifinal? And I'm just like, whatever you can do to support that kind of talk, I think is great. And as Dan pointed out, all the people that have been covering women's soccer, most of these people starting off covering at their own expense. You know, it's just like it's building a game. So I want to keep it open for questions.
I have two questions.
Okay.
First one that we led into, most of the people covering soccer, I saw Bogier tweeted out this week that probably nobody's going to break even on this.
No,
Do you guys actually make any money covering soccer? Is there that big?
Well, a large majority of us who cover the women's league do not do it as a full-time job. It's not my full-time job. There are a few who do it, but I would say anybody who is covering this league and getting paid full-time to do it, it's not their full-time.
I'm not even asking about full-time. It's not all pro bono? There is some revenue stream for some of the work that you do.
It's small, but
Okay.
there's,
It's
not to make money, let's put it that way.
Yeah, you're not doing it to get rich. And my other question was also, I guess, related to money. What are your thoughts on MLS and NWSL collaboration teams? The haves versus the have-nots and that kind of thing.
So I think if the MLS team wants to run an NWSL team and is fully invested in that, I think that's great. I have, I've heard, what I'll say about that is that anytime there's an MLS team and an NWSL team, the MLS team will always be the big brother. And anytime there's going to be a question about where resources are devoted, if it's 50-50, the MLS team will always win out, where you have teams like the Washington Spirit, who are the big sister of the Soccerplex. And now, them getting everything might be less than what an MLS affiliated team gets when they get the short end of it, 50-50. But that's something to
Yeah, they're also in a stadium that seated sells out at like 2,800, and to break even, they have to get 4,000 in there.
Right, so I don't think it's a bad thing, but I don't think it's necessarily, personally, and I'm in the minority, I don't think it's necessarily the be all end all.
Yeah, I was asking for both sides of that, since there is the concern that where there is no MLS team, that the clubs are going to have smaller and smaller resources.
Certainly something to keep an eye on going forward, for sure.
Well, I think it's very important to note the difference between where MLS was in 2000 when they founded the WSA and where MLS is now.
Right.
So when they founded the WSA in 2000, MLS was very interested in trying to start a competing thing, and the national team players were like, no, we're only going with John Hendricks in the WSA. At that point, MLS had just finished its fourth season. Was not, not in any of its own venues. I think, Crew Stadium had just opened up. We had the first soccer-specific stadium open up. They didn't have the deep pockets to
How
play
long was
with.
it before all of the MLS teams weren't on the league? Was it Anschutz owned how many for a while?
Anschutz owned 5 or 6 for a while. It wasn't,
And it was way after 2000.
yeah, and you had the contraction in 2002. You finally had expansion again in 2005. But there's a lot of people I know who just started following women's soccer maybe in the last 4 or 5 years. So they assume that MLS is this, it's always been the rich big brother. It's like, no, it's in a much different position now. So the fact that almost all of them control their own venues now, which was not true. So for me, having worked operations with the Dynamo for a decade and seen that side of things, and just seems like it makes things so much easier. So Dan's point of, even if you're getting the short end of the stick with an MLS team, you're getting so much more than,
It's a much bigger stick.
yeah. That being said, it still doesn't guarantee that everything is run well, because as your club is growing, if you have competing interests, and not just men's versus women's, but okay, you've got your youth academies, and now you've started a Division II men's team, and then how do you balance all that, and how do you market all of that? So I think that's uncharted territory, and we've seen, obviously it's easy to say, oh, Portland's a model city. It's like, but Portland's also an outlier. That being said,
Portland.
yeah, it's like, but clearly there's things they're probably doing internally, because they didn't double their staff when they started with Thorn. So there's things they're doing internally that I'm sure they could share with Houston, Orlando. NWSL, same as WPS and WSA, is they never were around long enough to really be able to share best practices, you know, to start working out kinks. And I think we all assume that, oh, we just, you know, NWSL learned all these lessons from WSA and WPS. It's not necessarily the same people involved. It's definitely not the same investors. You had some overlap each time, but it doesn't mean that, oh, we learned not to do all those things. There's always going to be a learning curve, you know, as franchises come in. Orlando, they've done a great job. I mean, and again, this is looking from the outside in some things, but they're still a very young franchise. You know, even within MLS, and they're building a new stadium. So think of all the things that they have going on.
And I'll throw in two other points about this game in particular, is that you got the Spirit, who were the worst team in the league 3 years ago, and have slowly, incrementally built up to where they're now arguably the best team in the league, and you have the Flash, who were in the final in 2013, tore themselves apart, and now they will have 5 players from last year's draft and 1 from this year's draft starting. We haven't, in the other leagues, we never had enough time, and probably the teams didn't have enough faith that they were going to even be around to build their franchises like that. So we're in more uncharted territory in that way. And to what Jen was saying about different people being involved, everybody in this room likely knows somebody, whether you know it or not, who was a fan of one of the other leagues and didn't come back, because there were fans of those leagues. Those leagues drew more people.
There were 21,000 people at that 2000.
And they're not around.
They're not going to Breakers games.
Exactly. The Breakers were drawing like 8,000 in Anderson Field in 2003. So, you know, the point is that people lost their faith in the idea that women's pro soccer would be around. So meet people, and it seems like they've got it deep down in there. Let them know that NWSL is for real, and that there will be a 5th season and a 6th season, and so on and so forth.
And that's it reminds me too of, like, I cringe anytime I see any message that's about help, save, and sometimes even the word support, depending on how it's used. But it's like when the Dash started, they're like, buy tickets even if you can't go to games. We have women's soccer. I'm like, it's not a cause. Don't ever sell it as a cause, because you're not going to go to a game week in, week out because it's a cause. You're going to go to a one-off because it's a cause. You know, it's like, it's affordable entertainment with accessible players. It's fun to watch. As my sister says, it's over in 2 hours. You know, it's like anyone that I've given Dash tickets to afterwards, they're like, that's great, and it's only $20 a seat, you know, that kind of thing.
I have to ask, you know, I have to bring up Skyblue at some point today. Where would you rank that 09 finals? Or you've seen them all. Where, you know, top half, middle, bottom?
The final itself, middle or bottom, but the story, very good. And if I may embarrass you, that's what Jay Allen who wrote about that. It's on Backline.
It is on Backline Soccer.
BacklineSoccer.com wrote a review of the 09. If you're not familiar with the Sky Blue team,
Yeah, tell the story.
They were a brand new team,
That's why we're here.
a brand new league, and it's ironic because I went away twice that year, and I went away to a camping trip for a bachelor party with no cell service. Right as I was about to leave service, I got a text from a friend of mine that said Ian Sawyers was suspended indefinitely by Sky Blue for inappropriate conduct.
Their head coach.
Right, so I spent, who was the coach of the Cyberrays in that 2001 game, and also truly found his husband. So I spent most of the weekend trying to go to my car, seeing if I could get little bits of service to find out what was going on. Turns out he never came back, and Kelly Lindsay, who played center back, and I think we talked about her before, and honestly would have been a star of the national team if her knees held up. She was the new coach. So they kind of plugged along, and there were 7 teams before made the playoffs, and they were like a bowl team all the way. And then my best friend got married that year in France. And I was packing, getting ready to go to France, and I got this press release that said Christy Rampone named player coach for Sky Blue FC, because there was another issue with Kelly Lindsay, and she walked off the job with 2 games to go in the regular season.
Careful.
Christy Rampone took over, and they won their first game. They actually lost the last game of the season to Washington. That would have gotten them in the playoffs. And then ironically, the LA Soul beat the Breakers the next day to get Sky Blue into the playoffs. And the format that year was that Sky Blue was the 4th seed, so they had to play at the 3rd seed, at the 2nd seed, and then at the 1st seed. And the 1st seed was off for, I think it was 2 weeks.
So instead of doing a bracket was
Right,
4-3,
4-3,
winner 2, winner 1, yeah.
And so they went and they beat Washington, and they beat St. Louis, and then to thank LA for letting them into the playoffs, they beat LA in that game. Allison Falk got red carded early in that game, and it was, it was an okay game, but I think the story was good.
And it was 3 games in 8 days?
I will say that my favorite quote, I talked to the GM for that team. My favorite quote is Chris Ramponi. When they're talking about, packing, my favorite quote is, she says, pack for LA. We are going to LA. And that team just, I
So
love
they
that
had
team.
3 road games in 8-9 days. She'd just taken over as player coach, and she was pregnant with her second child.
Nobody knew she
Oh,
was
yeah,
pregnant until
right.
after the party.
She was pregnant a couple years later. And that format got kind of exposed the next year because it was, Philadelphia was I can't remember if they were the 3rd or the 4th seed. They were in the 3-4 game and they played Washington, which was the previous time that Riley and Guevara matched up in the playoff game, and it was like a 100-degree day. And Ashlyn Harris had a fantastic game for the Freedom. And Amy Rodriguez beat her like possibly the last minute of extra time. And then Philadelphia, they had to go to Boston. They played more extra time and they scored a goal. Denisha Adams, and did it go off her hand? Did it not? Did it hit the post? What have you? But then by the time they got to play FC Gold Pride, who was a way better team anyway, they were completely spent. So that format got a little bit exposed and they lost 4-0. Ironically, they went back the next year and they had eased up the schedule a little bit, so they didn't have to do weekend, weekend. And some of the players kind of quietly told me, yeah, we told you last year we were okay, but we really were exhausted. This year we're really okay. I don't think I was losing the PKs that year for the Flash.
Questions? Other questions? I saw more hands.
Just on the future of the league and MLS talk, I really enjoyed the podcast like a month ago about the MLS, but just very small sample size here, but the 2 this year and last year locations for championship game have MLS partnerships. Does that indicate anything in preference?
Well, I think that's about a venue that's controllable, because obviously, and big enough, because if you stick with the top seed hosts, well, if Sky Blue hosts, they're very limited in what you can get out of that game. So right now, you do have Orlando, Houston, Portland in stadiums where you can get a larger crowd, you have more resources, press box, think about all the things that really don't come with some of those other stadiums. And even now we have Kansas City and Chicago, not that they're part of those MLS teams, but they have a working relationship with those MLS teams, so I could even see games there.
Right. Western New York has a venue, and they had a really good final there in 2011.
They could have it.
So,
I think, and I hope it becomes the kind of thing down the line that MLS used to do as teams were opening their new stadium, that the reward for opening your stadium was you got to host the MLS game.
I have actually a question about sort of stadium-wise. I looked at the past 2 years attendance-wise per game before and after, before and after the World Cup, before and after Rio. And for a team that's won 2 consecutive championships, FCKC is moving around to multiple stadiums, and they actually have fewer. They're one of the only 2 teams who has fewer subscribers this year in the 4th year than they did the 1st year. So how do teams sort of address that? Washington's got their field. Is there a way to kind of? I think my question is more about what the cost of jumping fields and sort of not having a set.
And that's an important question because it's easy to go, oh my God, they only have 2,000 people, but if their cost of that venue is so affordable, that might be a better deal financially than if they have 3,000 people in a 20,000 seat. And that's where you can see the struggle, and this is kind of like where MLS was, where it's like, oh, we were in the NFL stadiums and it was too expensive, and not that you're going to necessarily see these teams build a stadium, but it's access to venues. That's the biggest challenge.
Monetary is one thing, but there's also, again, they've won 2 back-to-back and their subscribers and their attendance as a whole has gone down. So not so much in the monetary cost, but in a sort of
Exposure, impact.
cost.
Yeah.
This may or may not be relevant, but I feel like when MLS started, I don't know if you have any insight on this, but I feel like it took about 10 years for performance and attendance to kind of go hand in Exactly, and when people ask me about that, that's part of what I say, that I don't think, again, that it matters how you do. Kansas City is a bit of an anomaly, I agree with that, and I don't know the market well enough.
And it is a challenge when you do move venues. We saw FC Gold Pride and WPS, they were at Buckshaw where Santa Clara plays, and then they moved to the East Bay, so basically, you know, you were moving, what, 20, 25 miles
I think
east.
that would have been a great move if they had enough time.
Yeah.
Chicago was here in a great stadium, they're playing since the fire, but their attendance has gone down as well.
Other questions?
So generally, oh, sorry, go
I
ahead.
just had a point on MLS attendance. I forget what blog it is. Honestly, it's like big soccer talk or something. You can actually pull them from the start. Who knows how valid they are, right? Because it's a blog, but you can pull them and it's really easily exported to Excel, and you can just make a line graph with MLS and then compare it with, you know, equalizers like soft attendance numbers or something, and kind of see how they did and died for the first 5-10 years for the first couple of years.
And I would add, don't get totally hung up on attendance numbers. Each team has a different way of reporting those.
It was just weird
Yeah.
to like look at the numbers and see like, because I compared the year by year growth for it, and to see the, you know, the negative there, whereas other teams that had certain.
Yeah, it also did seem like every team got a small bump out of the Olympics, not as much as last year, but they maybe did not.
And there's also numbers we can't see of, you know, postseason last year who had bumps in season ticket renewals. And again, this fall as well, where even without the U.S. women winning the gold, I feel like there's been so much talk about it, positive or negative, there's been so much talk about it. Like every week on the podcast, like, crap, I have to do another 2-hour podcast because we've got so much to talk about. So the great thing is it's keeping it in the news.
You have a question on that?
Did, but but I guess it's kind of moved on. With the growing the league, I guess one of the issues I know as somebody who's over the age of 30 going to a game and getting ran over by crowds of 8-year-olds. How do they spread to adults? Because I know that a lot of my friends who would be possibly interested in going to the game are like, it's full of kids. I just want to sit in a seat, drink beer, and watch games.
Well, if you've read my things that I write at the end of every season about ways to improve the league, marketing to kids to me is a way to market yourself out of business. Boston's been a lot better about that. Portland, Houston too, has recently.
There's a beer garden ticket for tomorrow.
Now that said, and I come from New York and I've been to World Series and playoff games, met Yankee playoff games, the crowds are annoying, whether they're kids or grown adults. You know, the crowds are annoying, and it's kind of like one of the things that comes with growing the sport, right? Is that you want the sport to be bigger, right? Like
And we're so used to it to be ours
we
and
don't really
small
want
and
more media
accessible.
to come in, right? Because
Yeah.
they hone in on
No,
certain-
we're the only nerds. No other nerds
But
will.
we want more coverage, so, you know, I would say to get as many people as you know who are over the age of 30 to go and, you know, take over from the kids. And I think that, personally, I think the way to market to kids is the same way that most kids pick up on sports all over the country and the world, is that my mother and father like this team, so naturally I like them too. That, to me, that's how you market to kids, and it doesn't happen in a day or a week or even a year or even 5 years. But to me, it's the young adults that want to be sports fans, and you have to build a passionate fan base and make young adult people care about the fate of the team, and that should, in theory, pass down through generations.
Well, Dan said it to me once. He said, you know, you market to adults. The kids go to the games with adults. They grow up thinking this is what adults do. Okay, we market to the kids. They go to the games. They grow up and think, I don't want to go to that women's soccer game. That's what kids do. Anytime I'm looking at those WSA games, I'm like, where are those kids? They're not attending games now because it was sold to them. So it's this group thing. We're going with our club and blah blah blah. One of the things that the Dash realized at the end of season 1 was that more than 60% of their season ticket holders were couples with no children in the home. Either they didn't have kids yet, or their kids had grown. You know, and so for them it was portable entertainment, relaxing entertainment, you know, whatever. I think MLS went through this learning curve too. Toronto was the first team to really go, we're hitting the urban market, and we're maximizing that market. And, you know, from the beginning, all their games in MLS and go, oh, they really know what they're doing. They got all of that from Toronto. So before they came into the league, they're like, that's what we got to do. We're not doing the soccer mom thing. We're not doing the kids thing. Not that you don't have some group buys like that, but that can't be your baseline. And you know, when I was first talking with Brian Ching when they were doing Start the Dash, I said, you're gonna have a beer garden, right? And he looks at me, he's like, why would we do that? I said, let me explain to you. And I said, well, when I went to a couple games in Atlanta, in the WSA, and one of the things I thought was brilliant, they had behind one of the end zones, they had the kickback zone. You had to be 21. There were no seats there. It was just, you could leave your seat, get away from the screaminess, go have a beer, and taunt the opposing goalkeeper. It was so brilliant where here is an option, you know, for that. And much like where they have kid-friendly sections, it's also like, okay, you've got your supporter section where here's not kids. But I think that's a challenge, and I mean, I still see the Dash and Dynamo do it, where it's like, oh, let's call all the youth soccer clubs. Or I've heard people on radio go, okay, there's a women's soccer game. Where are all the women's soccer players? Why aren't they supporting this? It's like, if baseball's struggling, they're not saying, where are all the baseball players? Why aren't they coming? It's like, we need to build fans, not, okay, you used to play soccer, you have to come support this game. So.
My question is, how does the player experience and the fan experience and play of the NWSL compare to European leagues and leagues from England?
That'll be a good question for Cammie, who was here later. She did spend a season in Norway. Because neither of us having played in the U.S. or I can't really speak to
I
that.
can tell you that earlier today at the media availability, Jim Guevara went on a pretty good rant about how someone asked Ali Krieger about how she compares this final being in the Champions League final when she played for Frankfurt. And Jim kind of interjected and said that every match in this league is the equivalent of a Champions League final. So again, I've never been to a European game. I don't know a whole lot about those leagues, but I do know that those leagues are like haves and have-nots. And we might look at the
Much greater have
say
and
20,000, Sky Blue 2,000.
Paid, not paid, yeah.
Right, but Sky Blue can still beat the Thorns, and it's not a complete shock when that happens. So in that regard, I do believe that we are now coming around to the point where it is known around the world that this is the most competitive league that we have. That doesn't mean that there aren't clubs over in Europe that maybe do a little bit more than some of the clubs here, but from a competitive week-to-week standpoint, this is absolutely the best league in the world right now. And I don't know that that was always, it probably was always the case, but I don't know that it was so widely circulated until the last year or so.
And that reminds me of something we should point out about WSA. It was the first ever fully professional women's soccer league in the world. And when I read that, I was like, Dan, is that true? Because I knew that there were other leagues. I knew most of the European international teams had, they had all their players played on regular teams. I didn't realize that most of those were semi-pro if they were pro at all. So WSA, founded in 2003, that's the first fully professional.
And in fact, Steffi Jones, who just took over as the German coach, it might have been passed.
No, it was Jennifer Meyer. Yeah.
Steffi Jones actually left WSA to go to Germany to start a fully professional team. Like they were going to elevate one of the teams to fully professional, and it was a big deal. That was kind of their run-up to the 2011 World Cup, which was supposed to be their '99, only they got beat by Japan in the quarterfinals, so it didn't work out so well. But apparently, it was a great event over there in Germany.
One other thing, because I'm with Women's Soccer Weekly, and just so you know, we're running a poll about who's going to win, you or Dan, and you're up 75 to 25. So,
Totally has this ring for me to lose.
Home field advantage.
Yeah, I'm not. I already have a prize for Dan.
So we see these WSA finals and we see lists of Chinese players, but we see no Chinese internationals today. But the team is still certainly respectable. So is there a reason?
Two words. Lauren Gregg. She was the assistant coach for the 1999 Women's World Cup team. Briefly coach when they were between Tony DeChico and April Heinrichs. She was hired as like director of player personnel for WSA. She spent a year traveling to China to get the Chinese Soccer Association to to agree to that. None of them were signed in the international draft. They ended up going through the general draft because it took her so long to get the paperwork. And I don't think any of them were able to come back in 2003. Well, like Baiji couldn't come back in 2003 because of her visa, because of the war. So I would just hazard a guess that right now it's too expensive, too difficult, too many hoops to go through to make it happen for an NWSL team. WSA's goal was they wanted to be the best league in the world, so they were going to go to every possible country and get all the stars. So that's why you see that. But that's a great question.
Well, China has their own league now, and they pay very, very well.
That too.
And you're going to start seeing more and more foreign players ending up there. It's much like the men's league, they've thrown a lot of money at foreign players.
Yeah, and I don't know, also, I mean, China's okay, but I don't know if there's a player on the Chinese team that you would, like, jump through a lot of hoops.
It's
to make it happen.
costly, so there's got to be some benefit to it. All right, any other questions? All right, we're going to take a short break to set up for the nerd off. We've got snacks, we've got bathrooms back here. We'll start getting out tonight.